Tampa's first black cemetery was created on a 2.5-acre plot in 1901. Richard Doby, a wealthy black businessman, developed Zion Cemetery, then sold it to Isaac Warner, another successful black businessman who owned a casket company. By the mid-1900s, Zion fell into the hands of a white businessman who parceled it out for developments after reporting that all of the caskets had been moved. Construction of a public housing project on the land in 1951 resulted in unearthed coffins. This began an ongoing investigation and fight for decency that continues to this day and resulted in a Florida legislative action dedicating money and resources to investigating, cataloging, and restoring abandoned black cemeteries all over this state. In 1894, the Mount Carmel African Methodist Episcopalian Church began holding services in the Robles Pond Elementary School. Black businessman Richard Doby purchased 3 acres, which included this schoolhouse. Robles Pond was an established black community at this time. A 1901 map filed with the Hillsborough County Clerk shows this 2.5-acre Zion Cemetery marked. In 1907, Mount Carmel AME moved from the schoolhouse officially to a new building across the street and a block away from the cemetery. Daniel A. Perrin was the pastor. Doby sells the cemetery to Florida Industrial Commercial Casket Company. In 1916, Mount Carmel AME Cemetery became officially known as the Colored Cemetery, listing 92 burials in that year. In 1917, there were 88 known burials. In 1918, there were 68 noted burials. In 1919, there were 10 noted burials. Again, in 1920, there were 10 noted burials. In 1921, there was 1 burial. 1922 passed without a single burial. In 1923, Zion Cemetery vanishes from county maps. In 1923, the cemetery vanishes from county maps. Tampa city boundaries expand to include the church and Robles Pond neighborhood. 1 burial was noted in 1923. Even though the cemetery was no longer on county maps, this was the final noted burial at Zion, tallying in at 769. In 1925, a local newspaper reported black communities near Road 71 and Lake Drive being squeezed out by white developers. In 1926, Alice W. Fuller of Louisiana sells Zion Cemetery for $1 to Tampa developer H.D. Kennedy. Fuller being the daughter of Warner, who had originally sold the 3 acres to Doby in 1894. Fuller and Kennedy were both white. Newspapers at the time report that mass reburials were going on, moving coffins from Zion to neighboring all-white Catholic cemetery known as Myrtle Hill. In 1927, the Tampa Urban League reports Robles Pond had a population of 315. The city renumbered the block, so the 3800 block became the 3700 block. Zion Cemetery stood on the original 3800 block. In 1929, H.P. Kennedy wins city approval to build a 5-shop storefront on the 3700 block of North Florida Avenue, right on top of Zion Cemetery. Kennedy then petitions the city council to have taxes canceled for 1927 and 28 on the property, since it had been used as a cemetery. In 1931, all references to the old cemetery at the corner of Florida and Virginia Avenues are gone from all maps, city and county. In 1932, the Blue Moon Poultry Shop opens in Kennedy's shop, atop Zion Cemetery. 1933, some graves were exhumed. All the headstones were removed. Some graves were exhumed, but all the headstones were removed. In 1939, Kennedy started selling parcels off of the cemetery acreage. In 1950, the Robles Pond neighborhood was targeted as a locale for a new public housing complex. In 1951, the Robles Pond residents asked Tampa Housing Authority to not take their community through eminent domain. They lost. During the building, crews unearthed 3 caskets. The city tells reporters that all the bodies had been moved in 1925. Minutes of the Housing Authority meeting mention reinterring these 3 caskets, but had no plans to halt construction or search for more. In 1953, Robles Park Village opens. Barbara Feliciano, one of the first to move in, recalls human remains being found behind the storefronts on the 3700 block of North Florida Avenue. In 1954, 67 buildings in the Robles Park Village were officially dedicated. In 1962, a skeleton was discovered by a man digging a hole in his backyard within the 3700 block. In 2018, Ray Reid, noted as a sensitive, you might say, ghost whisperer, also a gentleman who researches potter's fields in the Tampa area and collects county death certificates and researches grave markers in neglected cemeteries, brought his research forward after many years working on the Poor Farm, which was one of the potter's fields in the Tampa area. His research had led him to a terrifying amount of unanswered questions about Zion Cemetery, wanting to know more, as in exactly where the bodies were after they'd been moved, or if they had been moved. He came forward to the city, as well as other groups similar to the work he was doing. After finding out about the recently discovered skeletons, he went to the Robles Park neighborhood, listening. He sensed many souls. He worked with more groups in the community. Ancestors of the deceased laid to rest here started speaking up. In 2019, the Tampa Times sent reporters to start questioning the Tampa Housing Authority about proof of the actual moving of these bodies, raising a real uproar in the community. Tampa Housing Authority fires back by hiring archaeologists to investigate. In a collaboration with University of South Florida Anthropology Archaeology Department and other volunteers in the community, the Zion Archaeological Advisory Committee was formed. In 2020, they discovered 115 caskets under one warehouse on the 3700 block, 126 caskets under a vacant storefront on the 3700 block, 17 caskets under the Sun State Wrecker Services parking lot under the 3700 block. I guess they weren't moved in 1925 after all. As of late, the three current owners of the land that Zion Cemetery sits beneath agreed to sell their parcels to a nonprofit being put together to restore this area into a proper memorial. In total, 300 caskets were discovered with ground-penetrating radar. In 2018, relocation of the families living in the 5 buildings of Roadless Park atop Zion Cemetery began. Radar discovered 126 coffins under their buildings and under lawns, between 4 and 6 feet down. The ground-penetrating radar studies continued for 2 years in the Robles Park community. To this date, all families have been moved, though unfortunately I report that there was a considerable amount of difficulty for these families during this temporary rehousing. One hand didn't know what the other hand was doing. Landlords that would normally have been accepting Section 8 vouchers were not accepting them for these people. Demolition of these 5 buildings has begun, and excavation so far has concerned every coffin with a skeleton inside for what the ground-seeking radar found. In 2021, Tampa planned to demolish this project anyway, as it had fallen into considerable disrepair, was subcode, and becoming, as many such neighborhoods are, dangerous to live in. In 2021, Florida State Representative Fentress Driscoll formed the Abandoned African American Cemeteries Task Force. Descendants of those at rest at Zion regularly visit this newly cleared land with flowers and ceremony. One resting at Zion is Anna Rebecca Wick, a freed woman born in Alabama in 1839. By 1900, Anna had 9 children. She could not read or write, but rented a room out of her home to a boarder, and at one point was employed as a cook. She died March 30th, 1912, at age 73. Most likely a pauper. Her great-great-granddaughter, Geraldine Williams of Ybor City, is amongst the community of descendants working to humanize their erased elders. But it doesn't end here. In Tampa Heights, just a few blocks from the Roadless Park housing project, stands the massive Woodlawn Cemetery. In 1901, a portion of this 40-acre cemetery was cordoned off to be the colored part. Listed as a potter's field in 1895, in comparing maps from 1895 and 2020, we interestingly see that the location of this potter's field or colored cemetery seems to have moved west. The entire western side of the Woodlawn Cemetery property is owned by the Greater Tampa Showmen's Association, the group owning Showman's Rest, a cemetery for circus performers, on the northwest corner of Woodlawn Cemetery. All races are laid to rest within Showman's Rest. Ground-penetrating radar has revealed 596 grave locations on this land without markers. In 2019, the city of Tampa admitted that Woodlawn Cemetery was burying people in the potter's field all along without documentation. And there's more. Memorial Park Cemetery was established after World War I as a resting place for Black veterans. Many who died in France knew their final rest here. Tampa, led by Mayor Jane Castor, has invested money and teams to clean, clear, and restore this and numerous other abandoned cemeteries in the city. The city of Tampa has taken over Zion, Memorial, College Hill, and Showman's Rest cemeteries. The Task Force on Abandoned African American Cemeteries has 65 cemeteries under its watch. Individuals investigate each, complete extensive reports, and present these to the Florida legislature. Formed by passage of legislation by Tampa Senator Janet Cruz and Representative Fentress Driscoll, the mission is listed as submitting a list of policy recommendations to the legislature along with a report on the status of abandoned African American cemeteries throughout the state and how to memorialize and preserve these rediscovered cemeteries. Using these 4 criteria: identification and protection, maintenance, education, memorialization. I've done several videos about abandoned Black cemeteries in my area. I received a comment that I should stop making this about race. I'm not Black. I'm not mixed. This is not about my people in that regard. But it is completely about race. I don't know how anyone cannot see erasure after erasure not being about race. These people are all our ancestors, and this has happened all over the country. Please pay attention. Please go out of your way to find an abandoned cemetery, Black or otherwise, in your city. Take a garbage bag and a rake. Honor those who came before you, who built the city you live in. Protect the dead from the living.